Tonight, several California lawmakers signaled today they're concerned Governor Gavin Newsom wants to wait until May to sort out major state money problems.
When countries run out of money, there's an obvious question that always comes next. Why not just print more? After all, governments create the currency. They control the system. If debt piles up and payments come due, why should they ever need to default, cut spending, or raise taxes? Why not erase the problem by printing money to pay their debt?
The governor of the Reserve Bank explains how money printing and inflation has eroded your purchasing power.
No one is excited or proud that inflation has been outside of the target. Central banks globally, including us, as well as fiscal authorities, pumped money in to keep jobs and livelihoods going. We print a number on a piece of plastic, which is an IOU that people trust because of what's behind it.
On the surface, it feels like a loophole, almost like a mistake in the rules. And in moments of crisis, it can feel less like a theory and more like common sense. And so, again and again, countries try it, not recklessly at first, but as a temporary fix, just a bridge, just until things stabilize. At first, it often works. The real problem is what happens next, because countries that rely on money creation to deal with debt don't fail all at once. The consequences arrive indirectly, through distortions that are easy to dismiss, easy to justify, and hard to reverse.
The U.S. government can't go bankrupt because we can print our own money.
It obviously begs the question, why exactly are we borrowing in a currency that we print ourselves? I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, why do we borrow our own currency in the first place?
In this video, we'll look past the simplicity of printing money. We'll break down how money is actually created, why it can feel painless in the beginning, and why the same strategy keeps producing the same long-term outcomes across countries, systems, and decades. Because the issue isn't whether printing money works, it's how long it works, and what it costs by the time you realize it doesn't. To understand why the idea of just printing the money is so tempting, it helps to start with what money actually is, and what it isn't. Modern money is not backed by gold or physical assets. It's fiat money. Its value comes from a shared belief that it will be accepted tomorrow, next month, and years from now. You accept it because others accept it. That belief is reinforced by law and institutions, but at its core, money works because people trust it to hold value long enough to be useful. That trust is the system.
We as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities, and that actually increases the money supply.
When people talk about governments printing money today, they're usually picturing something outdated. Physical cash is only a small part of the picture. Most money is created digitally, through balance sheets, by different actors for different reasons. Governments decide how much to spend and how much to tax. Central banks manage monetary policy, adjusting interest rates in their balance sheets. Commercial banks create money when they issue loans, expanding deposits in the system. These processes are related, but they are not the same. Conflating them makes the whole debate sound simpler than it is. Government debt enters the picture because spending and taxation rarely line up perfectly in time. When governments issue bonds, they're not doing it because they've run out of money. They're doing it to spread costs over time and give investors a predictable contract. Lend money now, get paid back later with interest. Those bonds don't disappear into a void. They're held by pension funds, insurance companies, domestic savers, foreign investors, and sometimes central banks. Government debt isn't just a number on a ledger. It's an asset someone else is relying on. As long as investors believe a government will repay its debt without eroding its value through inflation, the system holds together. Bonds roll over. Interest rates stay manageable. Money continues to function as expected. The tension appears when that belief starts to weaken, because money and debt don't fail all at once. They fail when expectations change, quietly, unevenly, and often after long periods where everything seems fine. And that's where the real debate begins. Once you understand that modern governments issue their own currency, the appeal of printing money becomes obvious. If you control the unit everyone uses to pay taxes and settle debts, default feels unnecessary. Why borrow at all if you can create what you need? From that perspective, debt starts to look optional rather than binding. In the short term, this logic often appears to hold. Expanding the money supply can fund emergency spending without immediate tax increases. It can stabilize financial markets during crisis. It can prevent recessions from turning into deeper collapses. Unemployment can fall. Growth can return. The visible effects are often positive, especially when the alternative is doing nothing. These outcomes matter politically. Printing money is faster than raising taxes and less visible than cutting spending. Inflation, when it appears, shows up gradually. It's diffuse. Prices rise unevenly. Responsibility is harder to pin down. Compared to explicit fiscal choices, money creation feels indirect, technical, and easier to justify as a temporary measure. There's also a psychological layer. People naturally associate money with wealth. More money feels like more resources. That intuition is powerful. Even though money itself doesn't create goods, services, or productivity, it rearranges claims on what already exists. Printing feels like creation when, in practice, its redistribution spreads across time and prices. And that redistribution is not even. New money does not enter the economy uniformly. It enters at specific points, typically through government spending, financial institutions, and credit markets. Those closest to the source receive it first. When prices still reflect the old level of scarcity, governments spend it at full purchasing power. Banks lend it before prices adjust. Asset holders often benefit early as financial prices rise. By the time the money reaches wages, savings, and fixed incomes, prices have already moved. Rent, food, energy, and assets cost more. Purchasing power erodes before incomes catch up, if they do at all. This staggered process, known as the Cantillon effect, means money creation quietly transfers real resources from later recipients to earlier ones. It isn't just a microeconomic tool, it's a form of social allocation carried out indirectly. This is why inflation feels unfair even when it's modest. The issue isn't only higher prices, it's asymmetric impact. Those with financial access, leverage, and assets are often protected or enriched. Those living paycheck to paycheck absorb the costs first. What looks like a neutral technical adjustment becomes, in practice, a social policy with winners and losers, just one that avoids explicit political accountability. Taken together, these forces make money creation an attractive tool. It works quickly, it avoids visible trade-offs, and it often produces outcomes that look like success, at least at first. The problem isn't that this logic is irrational. It's that it's incomplete. Because the same mechanism that stabilizes a system in small doses can destabilize it at scale. The effects don't show up immediately. They compound. They change behavior. And once confidence begins to shift, the tools that once felt safe start behaving very differently. That's where the real risk enters the picture. Not in using money creation once, but in relying on it repeatedly, without clear limits or an exit. And that's what we need to look at next. Inflation starts with a simple imbalance. When there is more money in the economy, but not more goods and services to buy, prices rise. Money becomes easier to get, but things remain just as limited. Sellers respond by charging more, because buyers are willing and able to pay more. Imagine a classroom with 10 kids and 10 snacks. Each snack costs $1. If everyone suddenly gets $2, but there are still only 10 snacks, the snacks do not multiply. The kids compete harder for the same food. The price goes up. Nothing real has improved. Only the numbers have changed. That is what happens when too much money is created. When governments print large amounts of money, this pressure spreads across the economy. Prices rise slowly at first. Food becomes more expensive. Rent follows. Energy costs increase. Wages usually rise later, if they rise at all. People notice that their money looks the same, but it does less. Savings lose value over time. Money set aside for the future buys less than expected. Paychecks stretch less each month. Inflation works like a hidden tax, reducing purchasing power without any formal vote. As prices rise, people react in ways that make the problem worse. Workers ask for higher wages. Businesses raise prices to cover higher costs. Governments face pressure to spend more, often funded by creating even more money. This creates a feedback loop. Each step feels reasonable on its own, but together they push prices higher and faster. Inflation begins to feed on itself. At the same time, confidence in the currency weakens. Investors worry about being repaid with money worth less. The currency loses value. Imports become more expensive, adding another layer of pressure.
The government and the Fed are printing trillions and trillions of dollars to fund the relief effort for this 2020 crisis, but have you ever wondered what happens if the government prints too much money?
When people hear warnings about printing too much money, the examples often sound distant or exaggerated. Different countries, different eras, different problems. It's easy to assume those stories don't really apply anymore, until you look a little closer. Take Germany in the early 1920s. After World War I, the government faced massive bills it couldn't easily pay, including war reparations. Instead of raising enough taxes or cutting spending, it turned increasingly to the printing press. At first, it seemed manageable. The economy kept moving. The prices started rising faster than wages. By 1923, the situation spiraled. Money lost value so quickly that people rushed to spend it the moment they were paid. Life savings disappeared. The problem wasn't just higher prices. Money stopped working as a reliable way to plan, save, or trust the future. The damage lingered long after inflation ended. Fast forward to Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and the pattern feels familiar. The government faced shrinking production and growing deficits. Printing money looked like a way out. It wasn't. Prices accelerated until the numbers stopped making sense. Banknotes reached denominations of trillions of dollars, not because people were wealthy, but because the currency had collapsed. People eventually abandoned it just to function day to day. Then there's Venezuela, once one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. It relied heavily on oil revenue while funding deficits through aggressive money creation. Inflation crept up, then surged. Savings were wiped out. Basic goods became unaffordable, and millions of people left the country. What ties these stories together isn't chaos at the start. It's intentional. In each case, money printing delayed harder choices and created the appearance of control. Over time, confidence eroded, productive capacity fell, and leaders printed even more instead of reversing course. That's the pattern worth paying attention to, because it doesn't start with disaster, it starts with relief. At this point, a reasonable question comes up. If printing money is so risky, why do advanced economies seem to get away with it? Why doesn't the same collapse happen every time the United States, Europe, or Japan expends the money supply? The answer starts with institutions. In most advanced economies, central banks like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank are designed to be independent from day-to-day politics. That separation exists for a reason. It creates distance between short-term political pressure and long-term monetary stability. Governments decide how much to spend. Central banks decide how money is managed. When that line holds, confidence tends to hold with it. That's also where confusion around printing money usually begins. During crises, central banks often use tools like quantitative easing. At its core, QE is a way for a central bank to step in when markets panic, adding money to keep things from freezing up. It increases the money supply. but it's not meant to be used all the time. Think of it like a teacher who lets students redo a test when something unfair happens. Maybe the fire alarm went off, or the instructions were wrong. The redo calms everyone down and keeps things fair. But if the teacher allows unlimited redos every time a student is unhappy with a grade, the test stops meaning anything. Students stop studying. Trust breaks down. The rules no longer work. The United States has another advantage: the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. Global trade, savings, and financial markets rely heavily on dollars. That creates constant demand for US debt and gives the US more room to borrow and create money than most countries have. But that privilege has limits. If investors begin to doubt long-term discipline, they respond. Interest rates rise. Borrowing becomes more expensive. The currency weakens. These reactions aren't political statements. They are market signals that confidence is shifting. That's the modern constraint. Advanced economies don't collapse overnight because their systems are deeper, more trusted, and more flexible, but they still operate on belief. Once markets question whether money creation is a tool or a habit, the same forces start to appear, just more slowly. No system escapes gravity. Some just fall later than others. And that's why the debate doesn't end with, can they print money? It ends with, how much, how often, and what happens when confidence starts to change. If printing money isn't a long-term solution, the obvious question is, what actually works? The answer is less dramatic and far less convenient, but it's also the only path that has consistently reduced debt without breaking the system. The most reliable lever is economic growth. When an economy grows faster than its debt, the burden shrinks naturally. Debt is best understood as a weight on the system. You can try to shave a little off the weight, but the more durable solution is to make the economy stronger, more productive, more capable, so the same weight feels lighter over time. This strength doesn't come from tricks or shortcuts. It comes from higher productivity, new technologies, more people working, and businesses producing more value per hour. Growth expands the pie, making existing obligations easier to manage. It's slow, but it's real. Fiscal discipline matters just as much. Governments that successfully manage debt tend to commit to spending rules, credible budgets, and tax systems that actually fund long-term promises. That doesn't always mean austerity, but it does mean making trade-offs visible. Spending today has consequences tomorrow, and pretending otherwise eventually catches up. Inflation plays a more complicated role. Moderate, controlled inflation can help reduce the real value of existing debt over time. Many countries have used this quietly and intentionally. The key word is controlled. Once inflation escapes expectations, it stops being a tool and starts becoming a problem of its own. The difference between useful and destructive inflation is narrower than it looks. History offers examples where this approach worked. After World War II, several advanced economies carried debt levels far higher than today's. They reduced those burdens over decades through growth, steady inflation, and institutional credibility. No single policy did the job. The outcome came from consistency over time. The hardest part is political reality. These solutions demand patience. They require choices that don't pay off immediately. Productivity reforms take years. Budget discipline creates losers before winners. Growth strategies are uncertain. Printing money, by contrast, feels fast and painless. That's why shortcuts are tempting. And that's why they keep reappearing. What actually works rarely feels satisfying in the moment. It works because it respects constraints instead of trying to erase them. The idea that governments can just print the money persists because, on the surface, it feels powerful. It offers control in moments of uncertainty. It promises solutions without sacrifice. And for short stretches of time, it can appear to work well enough to reinforce the belief that the old rules no longer apply. But history keeps telling a more complicated story. Governments can create currency. They can change numbers on balance sheets. They can move resources forward in time. What they cannot do is print real value or manufacture trust on demand. Those things are built slowly, through productive economies, credible institutions, and consistent behavior over long periods. That's where the danger lies. Printing money feels strongest when confidence is still intact. It becomes most destructive only after that confidence begins to crack. By then, the costs are harder to trace back to the original choice, and much harder to reverse. The lesson here isn't that money creation is always wrong, or that debt is always bad. It's that simple fixes rarely stay simple. Every shortcut carries a trade-off, whether it's visible or not. And the most appealing economic ideas are often the ones that deserve the most skepticism. In a world shaped by constraints, incentives, and delayed consequences, understanding how systems actually work matters more than believing they can be bypassed, especially when the promise sounds too easy to question. If you want to see how smart choices, risk, and timing shape real outcomes, hit subscribe. See you on the next one.